Chris, I rolled a 6.
Andy, the topic we will be discussing today is, how do you set the atmosphere at the table? How do you get away from the default of adventure slapstick?
Oh my, okay.
Yes, and this topic was added by Matt Wilson back in episode 3, and I've been wanting to talk about it since episode 3.
Chris, that was like a year ago.
It was legitimately
possibly over a year. That's a little disturbing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Matt, we finally got to your topic.
Hello, and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
I'm Andy Rao.
Yeah, and no guest this week, but we are going to discuss this topic with the best of what we can do about it. But before we get too far into it, Andy, so on one of our group chats, we've been talking about this latest Kickstarter from Monty Cook Games
Yes.
for a game that I'm just going to try to say this out loud. Patalis?
I've always said Tolus.
Tolus.
But
Okay.
it's possible the correct pronunciation is
Yes.
something totally different.
Yeah, and I know we actually had a conversation about this a month or so ago, and I've completely forgotten. But it has one of those names which is just like, it's super rad in like a 90s sort of way.
Oh,
then,
yeah.
Yeah.
It can only be printed like on like a heavy metal album cover font, like where it's all squiggly and spooky.
Yes, yeah. So, well, one of you listeners knows exactly how to pronounce it and is mad. But yeah, there's the Kickstarter going right now, and it looks kind of impressive. So the tier where you get the printed materials looks like, I mean, it's something like 1,000 pages worth of material.
Yeah.
But it's $150. But
yeah,
for for the right person, it's worth it. But probably for everybody, it'd be worth it to have that sort of thing in your possession.
Yeah, I have been anticipating this Kickstarter because Monty Cook Games has been promoting it over the past couple of weeks, and I was getting excited, but I just know based on past Kickstarters, Monty Cook Games puts out great products that are super worth your money, and they charge for what they're worth. And so I nervously clicked over to the Kickstarter this morning to see what the bad news was, and it was pretty bad news.
Yeah.
That said, I mean, if you can scrounge up the cash, or you're just a Moneybags gamer, I guess, it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, it looks great. I mean, like the PDF itself is 40 or so, and that is not to say that it is not worth every penny, and probably not charging enough. But it's a little bit rich for my blood. But this thing looks amazing too. Yeah. At the same time. Yeah, I mean, this is probably a topic for another day, but I mean, like, there is something really intriguing about just kind of dropping the money on a gaming, like, the word that's been tossed around is like an artifact, right? Like a gaming artifact that you're really going to kind of love, put on the shelf, keep forever. Your kids will probably, throw it away when you die, but like, it's just kind of a cool thing to have.
So, Chris, does the idea of a giant tome appeal to you? Or are you if it could come in a pamphlet size, I would buy it person?
Oh, yeah. Like the giant tome is like categorically uninteresting to me.
Okay, have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just the sort of thing where the detail would be really neat. But I think having all that information, I would just get paralyzed with making sure that I was getting it all right. Right. Like if you're at the table and you're like, it's bad enough that you have a bunch of rules and stuff, but I've also had like a story Bible too, that I was having to look up everything in.
Yeah.
that would not go well for me. But I appreciate it.
Do you like the idea of a mega campaign like that's got, years worth of material in it? Or is that not what you look for as a GM?
Right now it isn't. I could see that being different at a different stage in life, but yeah, just with everything else that I have going on, the thought of doing a campaign for, like, signing up for a campaign that's going to be 5 years long or longer, looking at the size of this book is just, it's not super compelling. I would rather do a bunch of like smaller, shorter things, which I guess, I mean, like you could do, right? Like it's a big city. You could have a bunch of little campaigns spread out throughout it too. Well, what about you? Are you like, if you pay for this and drop the money, like, would you just run this for the next decade?
I don't think that I would. I love the idea of these giant campaign books, and I've backed some Kickstarters, some RPG Kickstarters that have produced some, and they're awesome artifacts. I love flipping through them. I love reading them, but for whatever reason, I don't know. I tend to get way more value out of like little, thin, more sketchy, like not sketchy in the sense of bad, but sketched out game products. You know, like so a 32-page adventure is something I will definitely run repeatedly. You know, a 600-page tome. I don't know. There's something about going through that tome and then trying to pull out of it a 32-page adventure that I can actually wrap my head around. So also as like a physical product, I find that the physical quality of printing in RPG books varies all over the place. And some of the big tomes I have like the spine immediately breaks and, you know, pages fall out because it's too, you know, it's too heavy for the binding. Like, and like Monty Cook is a company I would trust to do a big hefty tome and have it be solidly put together. But, you know, I would hate to drop many dollars on a big book sight unseen. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to, I'm a little picky when it comes to kind of, I don't want pages falling out of my books.
Yeah, that is not a shock at all. You know? Given, you know, it's like the bar gets set at a very certain place when you have to be able to say that you have a D&D podcast, right? So it's like, like I don't think anyone is going to scratch their head when it's also like, oh, he's a bookbinding nerd too.
Yes, raise your hand if you're listening and you have researched like bookbinding, like how to repair an RPG book binding.
Raise your hand if you've done it, right? It's like not even just research.
I work at a university and I have heard you can get books bound there, like book bindings repaired there, but it is only shame that has kept me from walking in there with my 600-page Rapan Athuk like mega dungeon book. Anyway,
yeah, you'll get there eventually.
I'm just working my way up to it. So
yeah. Well, I mean, to me, this actually dovetails really nicely into our topic at hand, right? So about setting the atmosphere at the table.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, like this book and others have a very particular like style to them. When you're looking at it, I mean, you look at the cover of this thing, and there's like a, you know, rad dragon thing, you know, death metal font, all that sort of stuff, right? So like the sort of the default, right, in Matt's question of adventure slapstick really doesn't seem like it would fit very well with this.
Yep.
So yeah, like maybe let's just start by talking a little bit about like the atmospheres you have been able to set at the table, and like which ones do you feel like you were effective at doing.
To be totally honest, this is an interesting topic, and I don't know what I'll have to contribute here because the tone of most of my games does fall in the adventure slapsticky zone, sometimes more and sometimes less. And it sometimes amazes me that even a genre like Call of Cthulhu, that is, you know, supposedly this kind of nihilistic horror where you can't win and you're just fighting to win Earth another couple years or something like that before it's inevitably able to run. Even those games get kind of slapsticky in play. And I've been actually thinking about this more and more because I have been trying to listen to a lot more actual play podcasts of different game systems that I would like to play, but I don't have an opportunity to do it. So I'm trying to listen to people playing it to get a feel for it. And man, that adventure slapstick is everywhere. It's jokey. It's just, everything is really jokey. And I get it. It's super fun. And I often, you know, am laughing along with it. But sometimes I think, man, can someone just play this straight, or at least in the tone that the game, you know, calls for in its text. So that's a really long-winded answer to your question. I would say, honestly, though, most of my games are kind of that somewhat jokey tone, even when the game setting itself is deadly serious. How about you?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, certainly all D&D that I play is definitely in that mode. And I think that's primarily player driven, but also just like, I wouldn't really want to play like a gritty fantasy in that system. If I was going to do it, I'd, you know, choose something else. The places where I've had some success at setting the tone in a different way have been like with indie games. So when I ran the Quiet Year, you know, the couple times that I played it, that game just the way the rules are written and the way that you can kind of set up the game, it becomes very like contemplative when you're playing it. So when people are thinking about like what they're going to add to the story, it's not like let's add zany jokes, right? It's a lot more like dramatic turns and things like that.
Yep.
So there's still definitely laughter at the table as you're building the world, but there's something about how the rules and the structure of that game were presented that really lends itself to a seriousness. Yeah, so it's interesting. I've had the same experience like playing in like Cthulhu Mythos sort of games where like the subject matter is so dark, but like you just constantly feel the need to break the tension, or it's just, people at the table, you're just having fun like that. But if you really just sit there and kind of dwell on what's actually happening, it'd just be terrifying, right? Like,
yeah.
But yeah, like it does make me wonder, like, especially as a player in those games, sometimes I want that serious moment, and so you can generate it a bit, but like then it always kind of ends up steering back towards, well, let's make jokes.
Yeah,
because like you are hanging out with your friends still.
Yeah, I would love to sit in, somehow through the magic of time travel on some early D&D games and just get a sense for what the tone was of that. Has that kind of jokey adventure been the default mode for everybody since the games RPGs were invented, or is this a reflection of kind of modern humor sensibilities, or does D&D play a different kind of role in the entertainment than it used to? I don't know.
Yeah.
I would be interested to hear sometime. But when I play at conventions and stuff like that, it's not just like my table and your table where this happens. In a typical convention game I play at will have a lot of that jokiness, and I don't want this episode to be about like dissing that adventure slapstick, because it's super fun, and one of the reasons it happens all the time is because we all love to laugh, and it's a great way to spend an evening laughing with your friends. But definitely there are times when you want to aim for something else. So you asked me this question and I kind of skipped answering it by babbling on. Can you tell us about a specific game where you went for like an unusual tone, or just a really out of the ordinary thing? You talked about the serious tone of A Quiet Year. Are there other like moods that you've been able to evoke at the table? Have you ever created like a spooky environment, for instance, or played in a game that got one and it was genuinely spooky, and someone didn't immediately crack a joke and pull you out of it?
Yeah. I was trying to remember that, and I was thinking back to a Halloween, like a little Halloween diversion that I did a year or two ago or so. So I actually made a haunted house for that, right? Like, so they went through this haunted house, and I really tried to play with like space, spatial stuff in that, and then also just with some descriptions and stuff to set sort of a spooky mood of dread or foreboding, things like that. And I think it kind of worked. It did not. It wasn't perfect, but it was kind of fun to play with some of those expectations. There was definitely some moments at the table where like players kind of stopped and were like, "Whoa, what is going on?" Right? Like, and that's fun, I think, to get people into that mode a little bit, and just like, it is going to be spooky, right? Like, your table's always going to fall back to joking around because they like each other, right? And that's what humans like to do.
Yeah.
If they don't like each other, or if they're professionals and professional game players or something like that, I think they might be able to break out of that as a habit. But yeah, I think like the most you can ever really ask for is moments, maybe, when you're like moments of seriousness from people. I don't think I would play very many games if they were all serious.
For sure,
all the time. Yeah,
I can think of one game that has long stuck in my memory, even though it was probably about 15 years ago that I ran it. It was a single game, and it was a one-on-one game with my wife of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. We were playing the second edition of that, which was new at the time. And that game, I still remember it vividly because that was a somber and somewhat melancholy game. And I wish I knew a little bit more what I did to make that happen. Part of it must have been that I only had one player, and so there weren't lots of other people to kind of riff off of. But that game was somber, and there was an NPC that was teamed up with my wife's character throughout the game, and he ended up dying through the bad rolls, and something about that really captured a unique feel that I I haven't seen somber very much in the last decade or so of my gaming. So yeah, it might have simply been just that there was only one player. That might have just been might have been the key right there, because you are more able to control a mood when there's just you and one player, and it's easier to mutually agree on what sort of feel and style you're going for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the agreement and kind of consent at the table too is a part of this as well. So the times that I've used like really explicitly use the X card, or like a variation on it that I do at the table, like that has been good for setting some expectations about sort of like what's okay.
Yeah.
And it's not even really like okay, now we're going to go around and say like what our line is. It's more just, making sure that the tool is available for folks, I think makes them think through a little bit more of like what they're about to say and what they're going to do. And like, even if it never comes up, right? Like even if no one ever has to play the card.
Do you ever do anything with the physical environment to kind of encourage a certain mood? Like a stereotype example might be dimming the lights to play a horror game or something.
Yeah, I would like to. I've long had kind of a desire to like, write some music and like, set the lights to a certain mood, like actually like write out like my own themes and stuff for, stuff that's going to happen at the table. I think it'd be really fun to do that, but I just realized I don't have time time to invest too much into that. But I love it. Like I know like Jess, who's been on the podcast before a couple of times, like she's mentioned that she was, she has candles that she lights, for each of the players, at the table. There's just some like little stuff that you can do like that, which doesn't take a whole lot of time to set up. It just takes a little bit of care to do that. I think it would be fun to try, and I just haven't done it or implemented it.
Yeah.
What about you? Have you done anything like that?
Nothing really springs to mind. I'm sure I've done things like dimming the lights a little bit. I have put background music on for games occasionally, but it's not something I do in a typical game, I guess. And I wouldn't say that it's ever made a smashing difference in the tone at the table. Why do you think we talked? We mentioned a few minutes ago that, people just love to joke and stuff like that. But the literature that D&D and other types of entertainment that D&D is sort of channeling is not really slapsticky humor. So, think the Lord of the Rings, it has comic moments in it, but no one would say that it's a jokey adventure, right?
Yeah.
And, this is, name your favorite fantasy series that we all are, that you're subconsciously kind of channeling Game of Thrones or Michael Moorcock or whatever. Why do you think we default to that jokiness when the genre doesn't really call for it?
I think that really gets to the core of what this question is about. I think it's a really fair question to ask, and I really wonder if most of it is related to the fact that like most of us aren't actors, right?
Yeah.
So we don't really have the skills to do much other than sort of interact in the ways that we know. So like think about the classes you took in high school or college that like everybody had to take. So you might have taken a speech class, and that's probably it as far as performance, unless you really specifically went for theater.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so like we know how to do that, and no one really likes doing that, but everybody sort of enjoys and can figure out how to make their friends laugh. Right. So that's sort of like the mode that is pretty easy to slip into. I think if like we were all thespians, right, like we could, sit down at the table and like really make something happen there. But yeah, like I mean, that's a lot to ask from everybody to be able to like deliver a serious monologue or to cry in command or, whatever you want to have happen at the table. Like when we all understand how to laugh.
Do you find that the jokiness levels change but based on whether the character or the player is a newbie or a really experienced player? What I'm playing with in my brain is this idea that being jokey is kind of a way of deflecting some of our feeling of awkwardness, a performative awkwardness, because like you said, most of us are not trained thespians, and so you're always putting yourself out there a little bit when you're doing something. And I think for me personally, the idea I remember at a convention game of riffs, of all things. There was a point where my character was killed in kind of the climactic thing, and the GM turned to me and said, "Okay, make your death speech." and
Oh.
it really put me on the spot, and I felt super awkward. And then all eyes were on me, and I was, racking my brain. What are some, epic words that, I could say? And that's maybe an extreme that doesn't come up too often at the table, that you're writing a death speech. But anytime you're called to kind of be serious, I think that's an awkward thing, because we all know that it could come out really dumb, or, and so even though it won't, we all have that fear that we're going to sound like idiots trying to pretend to be sad or somber or scared or something.
Yeah, it's like, what, where they're going to kick you out of the table? Like,
right.
It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, and so, the easiest way to deflect awkwardness is to, crack a joke, and even at your own expense. So that's a really long-winded way of asking. Do you see that the players who've been doing this forever and are natural role players, are they better at keeping in mood, or do they crack snarky jokes as much as everybody else?
I think the more experienced players that I've played with have a confidence about their character choices that lets them not have to be the one cracking jokes all the time. Like, the first time that you play, you don't really know where things are going to go. So it's hard to really have an idea of, like, okay, my character is going to start at this place, and then I want maybe some of these things to happen, and like this is going to be a little bit of the arc. Maybe you don't have it totally planned out, but setting your character on a trajectory, right? Like, I think if you haven't really played a longer campaign, you don't know what that's going to be like. So it's easier to make character choices that are just sort of funny in the moment, like that, because you don't know who the character is. Yeah, and I think, like, as campaigns go on, I think and people get to know who they're playing, I think the seriousness can come out here and there. Just shifting gears a little bit, like, I think the GM has some responsibility for setting the tone, right? Everybody has equal parts, of responsibility at the table, right? Like, I don't think the GM is the one that's in charge of all the fun at the table or anything like that. But I think, like, when you're the one that's, nominally guiding the world or the story a little bit, it's up to you to ask sort of the right questions. So yeah, thinking about this, like, another time that we've been able to hit kind of a different atmosphere at the table was when I did ask, like, really personal questions about a character. I did this a couple times, and it's something that I, like, really adore and want to get back to. They're sitting around the campfire, and it's just like, you have to tell me about the first time you, like, went hunting or something like that. Like, something that's not like tell me the first time you got in a bar fight. It's like, tell me the first time that, like, your parents took you, out somewhere, right? Like, something where a character is going to have to make, or a player is going to have to make a couple decisions about a character, and maybe tell a little bit of a story about their character, and how they might have just interacted in a pretty basic setting where there really isn't a chance for a lot of comedy, because it might have just been like just a little scene from their lives. Yeah, and so, like, that was actually pretty effective, and it did lead to a few moments where it's like, what's going on? Like, this is maybe, not going anywhere, and then a couple, but then it would go somewhere, and it's like, oh, that was a really cool character moment, that we just had from this dwarf who was just, previously joking about getting drunk all the time, right? Like, and it's, yeah, you get these neat moments. But if you don't make any space for that at the table, it's never going to happen.
No, I think that's a really good point. You mentioned earlier that you have been able to hit kind of that slightly more serious or more genre appropriate mood with some of the indie games that you've run. And I wonder if some of that is because a lot of indie-ish games and games on sort of the storyteller-ish end of the spectrum, the gameplay is a little bit more prescribed for you. It's not quite as free for all as, say, D&D can be. In a game where you're limited in the very specific moves you can do or the very specific ways you can react to a situation. Games where the game mechanically models more of the emotional type responses that in a game like D&D are left up to you, the player, to role play out. I wonder if those take some of the burden of playing through, potentially awkward scenes and make it easier not to be jokey. Does that make any sense?
No, it totally does. a couple weekends ago, I went to an art museum with Kyle Latino and a couple other friends. So Kyle's been a guest before. Yeah, so we went to an art museum and Kyle had us play this game called, I'm going to get it here, See, Feel, and Wonder, a game of aesthetic attunement. But the whole concept behind it is it gives you a framework for talking about a painting with a group of people. So you start off by saying, like, I see something in the painting, it makes me feel this, that, or the other, and it makes me wonder about, something, right? Like, so there's no real right answers to it. But the framework for the questions puts you in a certain mode of interacting with the art. And I think that's important to do. Otherwise, you're just going to go look like, what's the coolest art, that I see? Or, I want to go check out the armor because D&D nerd or whatever.
Does this museum have katanas?
I need to see the samurai swords. Kyle's writing those rules from very much like an indie game tradition, right? Like, if you will, as much as there's a tradition to this. But it is those really direct emotional questions about something that would be open-ended otherwise. And I think you're really right to point that out, that indie games can do this particularly well, where you really focus in on sort of walking through a scenario or walking through kind of a series of questions that's game-like in a sense, but gives you kind of a very emotional result.
That art game sounds great. I want to steal that just for my next family visit to a museum.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds really fun.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the show notes and stuff, but I would highly recommend it, and especially do it with people that you think wouldn't enjoy it, if that makes sense. Like people who wouldn't normally go to an art museum. Make them do this and you'll be kind of surprised at their answers to it.
All right, well, we'll check for that in the show notes. So
yeah, anyway, so gamify your art museum going, I guess, if you want a different atmosphere. Okay, so what atmosphere, if you could pull it off, would you want to pull off at the table?
Something I'd love to run is a fantasy game that captures the sort of intense desperation that you get in the more exciting moments of, say, the Lord of the Rings movies. A game where it's desperate and it's intense and it doesn't look good. And the characters all have to show steely resolve, fierce determination to get through a puzzle, and no one is going to joke about the fact that the enemy wizard is bald or something like that. So if I could run a game like that, and to be sure, I have played in D&D games that stepped into this, for a time or for encounters here and there, but it's never been a consistent tone throughout. But I think that would be really fun to have everybody just naturally on board with that, canning it on the jokes, except in very limited, okay, now is a time when we can all joke around. And now, I don't know. How would you answer that question?
I love the Final Fantasy series of video games. Despite the fact that they're not amazing, but right, it's just sort of what I grew up on. But I would love to, and I don't even know if we've talked about this on the show. I know you and I have talked about this before. I would love to find a way to run a way too self-serious game.
Oh, yes.
Which is also just this wacky, overpowered fantasy at the same time. Because by the end of most Final Fantasy games, you're summoning gods to kill any enemy in your path. While you're still complaining about I don't know if she has a crush on me or not. Right? It's
it's so true.
That sort of emotional.
That is such a magical thing that those games do so well. That's so weird. It's so weird.
Oh,
it's a beautiful thing to play through.
Yeah, so I don't even know if it would work, but I think it would just be really fun to be able to kind of play with that huge variance in power level, and then also just we are going to be super serious about this. This emotionally stunted, 18-year-old, right? At the same time. But yeah, I don't know.
It sounds like you need to bolt the world's crunchiest, most detailed, combat and upgrades system with the most indie, emotional mechanics, navigating high school crushes, social mechanics. You need to wed those two together and release it. And I think you'd be on the right track.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that would be fun. Yeah. GURPS plus Apocalypse World would be yeah. It's what everybody needs.
Have you ever actually thought about trying to run that, or is it just an idle thought experiment?
It's an idle thought experiment. I can't imagine ever finding the right group for it, and I don't even know if I'd be the right GM for it.
Yeah.
To be honest, like, yeah, like I don't even know what that game is. I bet there is some group that can do it, and I just want it to exist in the world.
Not to get too sidetracked, but I actually do feel like that is a genre that has not really been well represented in tabletop RPGs. Perhaps because it is such a strange combination of divergent themes and ideas. Okay, well, Chris, you now have your life goal, and that is to produce the game we just described.
Yeah. Part of the magic to me of those games is just the ridiculous numbers, right? Like, it's like the numbers go up into the thousands and tens of thousands and stuff like that. Even though, I mean, really it's like you're just scaling. I hit the enemy 4 times, right? Like, and then it dies like over and over. Exactly. But just the numbers keep ticking up, like you have to keep ticking up too. But like, there's something like the progression is fun. Yep. I think like levels in D&D and Pathfinder and stuff are so like it takes so much work to get them, whereas in those like video game RPGs it's just very much like you just get them whenever you want. You can just have as many as you want.
Yeah, the power level escalates with the escalation of the story. As the story ascends into the ridiculous, and like these games all end with you killing God or something like that, pretty much. The characters just level exponentially as the story scales up.
And even most of them end with some sort of ultimate power that you never knew was inside of you. Destroy So I mean, there's something that would be, I think, fun about that. And then there's also the mechanic in those of death is not the final thing, right? Like you very much like you can die and kind of restart and stuff. So like there's 100 design problems with translating Final Fantasy into a tabletop setting. Yeah. I'm sure a bunch of people have tried it. Goodness knows I would have tried it at 18 if I was into D&D.
Oh yes. You would have a 250 page, manuscript of your house rules to D&D to make that happen.
Yes, please kickstart. All right, well, I think we have exhausted this question somewhat. It's a really good question, and it's one that like this is one of those ones where I wish we might just kind of re-ask it to other people. So I think everybody has kind of pieces of the answer to this. Certainly we don't have the full answer.
We should start putting guests on the spot and asking them for their hot take on past questions that we found interesting enough, so because it is often the case we discuss a question and it's like it was so fun discussing that, but I would also like to hear what guest X, Y, or Z has to say about this. So okay, well we'll figure something out.
All right, well thank you all so much for listening. Really appreciate it. We have a couple of guests lined up still in the next month or two, I think, so that'll be a nice change of pace. I'm going to have a kid coming pretty soon, so we'll see what's going to happen there.
Congratulations.
Thanks. So end of May, I don't know, maybe we'll republish some old podcasts, or we might just go dark for a month or two. I don't know. We'll figure out. But as always, Greg, please let us know if you have any feedback, if there's anyone else that you think should be on the podcast. We would love to have them too.
For sure.
Well, I've been Chris Salzman.
I have been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.